Very nice. I mean, we've really stepped up. This is quite an improvement over the. I was on the first one that you did,
Yeah.
and I think we were both huddled around my computer in my
Well,
office.
yeah, it was. We're trying to get a little bit more intimate. It's we're maturing
Yeah, I like it.
like a
That's good.
fine wine.
It's very nice.
Today we're going to be talking a little bit about a sensitive topic. It's the sales talent crisis. We're going to take a few different areas when we talk about this, looking at really from a sales leadership perspective, talking about what different research that has come out, things that have happened recently in the news. And as always, please ask your questions. We're monitoring the chat. We would love engagement. If there's things that you want to say, questions, thoughts, comments, concerns, what have you, we're always here for you for that. But before we get into the questions, Dreamforce, first one that's happened in really 2 years, 2.5 years, if I can do math correctly, 3 years, I guess.
Yeah,
About
2019, I think was the last.
What were your thoughts?
I thought it was great. I mean, it was definitely a little weird, being around all those people. Haven't been in massive crowds like that in a long time, and I don't think I even saw a mask anywhere. So, but that was different for sure. But as far as the show went, it's classic Dreamforce all over again, right? I mean, it was, even though it was, I think I heard something like 30,000 people, it still felt like it was 120,000 people. It was wall to wall people, and the booth was packed. So it was fun. It was good. It's great to see people again, and great to kind of just walk around and see all the different people, doing their thing. And
I mean, yeah, that's always the fun thing about that show is you run into so many people that you've sold to, you've colleagues,
Yeah.
like, hey, where are you now? What are you doing? And then you also learn about new technology that's out there. That you're like, okay, that's actually pretty cool.
Yeah, I came back with a bunch of notes of companies I want to check out and different things. So yeah, Dreamforce is great. It's a one of a kind experience.
Yeah, it's can't wait for next year.
Yeah.
And not shameless plug, we have our user conference coming up over the next few weeks. It's going to be regional. Please make sure you attend. Reach out to anybody at Xactly. We'd love to host some people. So let's get a little bit into the topic. From really January of last year to early this year was known as the Great Resignation. I think that's shifted a little bit. People are figuring out what's happening in the industry. It's predominantly been what we've seen as a sales type of resignation. What are you seeing from that? How are organizations changing? How are they evolving that process? Where's it standing out the most for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think we'll have to have like a warning for all these cute little phrases that are out there. And I'm sure we'll hit on a few of them, during this. But the Great Resignation was one of them, and certainly I was, as a CEO, sort of afraid of it. I kept hearing about all these people that are just going to resign and leave and whatnot. And I actually feel like it was pretty short lived. And I feel like the majority of people that were, kind of on the front end of that whole resignation thing, they were really chasing the money. We had a lot of people coming in all different levels saying, oh, I'm going to get $50,000 more to basically go do the same job at XYZ company. And we saw a little bit of that, and I was talking to a lot of my peers, and they were all seeing that, and so that was a little unnerving because you're kind of going, I can't compete with that. So people would come in, and normally you'd be like, oh, well, we'll make a counteroffer, and now we're just like, have a nice life. Like, there's no way we can do that.
Well, I mean, that's the crazy piece, right? It shifted. I mean, usually those types of trends, they tend to last for a while, and then it was like overnight. Hey, as a leader, you kind of get the control back to where you're not at that type of mercy.
Yeah, I think it didn't last as long as maybe some of the employees wanted, but that primarily they got no support from the economy. And as soon as the economy shifted and you started having companies, laying people off and whatnot, then we had, catchphrase number two, the great regret coming on, right? So you had people who.
I mean, I know you're going to say I was, what Chris likes to call a boomerang.
Yes.
I left Xactly for 2 weeks. It was 10 years ago now, but
hey, you're in good company. Our chief customer officer, Bernie Kassar, is also
our
a boomerang.
VP of PR, right?
VP of PR.
She's left like 5 times.
MJ's left a couple times. No, I always have been very supportive. People sometimes say, well, why would you take them back? It's, even though I'm Colombian and, really into loyalty, I actually think it's really good because when people have left because they thought the grass is greener and then they go and find out that it's not, then they really appreciate the job in the company more when they do come back.
Right.
I'm sure you could expound on that.
Those 2 weeks were very profound that I left.
I will say, of all the boomerangs, I think you figured it out the fastest. He was like back on the doorstep 2 weeks later. That was great.
But yeah, I mean, it's as a leader though, when you think about it, what is it that, kind of going to my next question, when you think about the different reports that have come out, I know Harvard just recently put out a report surveying different elements of this, and there's the sales leader's mentality versus the sales rep mentality. When you think about the sales leader, what are the things that really are driving them to leave, or wanting to stay?
Well, it's a great question, and I think one of the things that we, because we've been in the space, 17 years since I founded the company, and it's really we consider ourselves thought leaders, and to be a thought leader, you got to be always kind of pushing ahead and not kind of following what others are doing, but driving the path and let the competitors follow you, which we've always enjoyed. One of the things we did prior to this is we did a survey of something like 402 senior level heads of sales, right? And it was really interesting to see some of the reasons why they were leaving. Historically, a lot of sales leaders are people who used to be sales reps, right? So they kind of come from that coin operated role. But I think money was like fifth on the list on this latest,
Mm-hmm.
thing because I think the world has changed. I think through the experience we've gone through with COVID and now, with the financial kind of crisis that we're in, I think a lot of these heads of sales are thinking differently, and even some of their reps are thinking differently. Now, that study we did was just about leaders, and so you would expect that leaders are less focused on the almighty dollar, otherwise they'd stay as reps because you can always make more
Well, I was
money.
just going to say that. I mean, that's the thing. That the dirty secret about sales leadership is you actually take a pay
You take
decrease,
a pay cut.
but it's getting leaders to think about that instead of being where reps are very much short term. Hey, I want to make money now. This is how it's a long term gain, because once you get into those companies, whether it's a company that's still privately held, they're PE backed, they're publicly traded. That's really when sales leaders can go and make that type of money that they're used to as an individual contributor.
Yeah, absolutely. That's right. But I think that what the data definitely showed, and I think what companies need to focus on and think about is that money's definitely important. We're in the business of helping companies figure out how to better pay and drive behavior of more of the leaf level reps and stuff, and even the leaders as well. But also like what the data showed, I think the number was something like 20% of these people that we surveyed, they were talking about culture as one of the reasons
Yeah.
why they would leave, or whether the company was, whether they felt like the company was doing good for the broader world, which I'm sure we'll talk about as time goes on. But it's a different world, and if you're a CEO or and you're trying to hold on to your star VP of sales or CRO, if you're not paying attention to how the world has changed and what's causing them to tick, you are going to be sorry, and you're going to lose some of these great people.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the things. Anytime I have a new leader come on board, whether they're experienced, it's their first time leading, it's always a question of you got to get to know the people that you're managing or that you're leading, because everybody has different things that make them tick. What's their goals in life? If it's closing a big deal, what would they go do with that money, right? Or if it's, hey, I need work life balance. There's people that are coming in that have young kids at home, and how do you balance that? And there's a lot of different aspects to that.
Well, I think you touched on something. I want to talk about the work-life balance thing, so don't let me forget that. But you touched on something that's really important. Is so many companies, because they grew up on Excel paradigms in terms of how to pay people, they dumb down their comp plans and they dumb down. It's a sort of a one size fits all,
Right.
as you know. And I think the modern era allows, with the modern tools, that you can customize these things and make it so that you really do find out what makes this person click, or this category of people or reps, because you'll find that the people that are BDRs or ADRs, the things that motivate them when they get that check is very different than when you and I get a check,
Yep.
right? So why wouldn't you take that in consideration as to how you think about motivating them? But anyway, I think on the work life balance thing, I think that's another one that the survey highlighted a lot around. And here's another buzzword that everyone's talking about. One of these cute phrases called quiet quitting. And I must have heard this 10 times while I was at Dreamforce. And I think the notion of quiet quitting is somewhat maybe even misunderstood, or maybe I've misunderstood it. But this is this idea. At first, I heard it was, oh, people that are just basically they've quit and they're just not telling you. But that's not really it. Then I heard it was people that were just kind of doing the minimum to get by. just kind of doing whatever it took just to skate by. And then, and sort of, people were talking about it in a negative connotation,
Yeah.
right? I'm actually wondering if quiet quitting isn't the new normal and it's a positive thing, right? Like, what if quiet quitting is just people saying, I'm not willing to, work 80-hour weeks anymore. My family's too important. I've learned through COVID that I can
Yep.
balance things better.
And that,
I mean, you have a young family. I'm sure that,
yeah, I still work like a dog. I mean, it's still 80-hour, 90-hour weeks. No, but I mean, seriously, you mentioned. I mean, that's where really it comes down to is COVID changed the way that companies operate. Right? There's never going to be. And I don't know what you think about this. This is one person's opinion. It's never going to go back to how it was before, where you're in the office 5 days a week, 8 to 5. It's going to be. I mean, you did a Slack video yesterday where you said, "Hey, we have 10 different offices worldwide. Come in if you want. If you don't, just make sure you're putting in the work. Like we're all adults. It's not a babysitting type of role. And so I
and
think
you're right on the money. So many companies are trying to figure out where this thing levels out. As part of Vista, we're part of 90 different companies in that family, and talking to a lot of CEOs all the time, and we're all struggling with this. Like, and some of them, when I was talking to one of my good friends, and they've eliminated all offices in all of North
mhm.
America. They don't have a single office, and I think that's pretty extreme. But I totally get it, right? And what Ryan's talking about is I did an internal video yesterday to the company because we had done this survey, and I was kind of going down that path of forcing people to kind of come back to work maybe 2 days a week, and when I realized, well, first we did this survey, and we got this resounding dichotomy message back where you had 60% of the people saying we're not interested in coming back, full stop, and you had the other
Yeah.
third saying we want to come back, like we miss the camaraderie, we miss the interaction, we want to come into an office. And there really was very little in between, right? And so I started thinking, like, why am I trying to force everybody to come? And I think it boiled down to, well, I'm paying all this money in rent for all these fancy
Right.
offices, and I kind of wanted to get my money's worth. But that's stupid, right? That's just
Now,
old school thinking.
I do think though there is something. I think there's different facets to this, right? Within different parts of the organization. I mean, we're talking today predominantly about sales leadership and coaching and that piece because I do think that as a seller, you can learn a lot by being around your peers. Now, how do you evolve that to accommodate that work life balance? Well, that's up to the individual leader how they want to go. Like in our Los Gatos office, we try to come in. It's not required, but hey, I come in every pretty much Tuesday and Thursday. My other leaders come in those days as well. We try to make it something. Now, as much as if you're watching this and you're on my team, I would love to see you every Tuesday and Thursday. It's not, mandatory, but it's how you learn, right? Because I think that's the piece. I mean, going back to probably when you were at your SGI days, how much did you learning hearing somebody on a cold call like, oh, I like the way that they said that. I like the way that that was
Well, you're
repositioned.
definitely hitting on something that's important. And as I've got, as you know, my two younger kids that are in the workforce, but earlier in their careers in sales. And in some ways, I talk to them and I say, I feel like you're missing out because in my early days, when I was a telesales rep, making calls at SGI back in the early '90s, I learned so much kind of through osmosis around just listening over the wall to what the person next to me was doing and things like that. And I worry that they're missing out on that. So I keep trying to encourage them, hey, find the right balance that works for you. Like, but
Right.
don't if you don't, if you can, there's still some benefit to coming in.
Well,
And I get it. Not everyone can do that, or not everybody wants to do that. I think that's the beautiful thing about this new world is that it has
a
changed.
lot of people I think are going back to the office. I mean, it took me an hour and 15 minutes today to come into the office. So
Somebody's going back because the traffic is
I
crazy.
mean, it's insane. Um,
But I would tell you, and then you heard me say this in the video to the company yesterday, and I think I remember, a long time ago, I'm a lot older than you, but a long time ago when I was getting my license, my driver's license here in California, they made a big point of saying, like, this is not a privilege. No, this is not a right. It is a privilege. And this privilege can be taken away from you if you are a lousy driver, right? As I told the company, I feel the same way about working from home. I really do think it's a privilege. And not a right. And so a lot of the accountability has to be, managers have to make sure that people are, doing their stuff and getting it done. As long as that productivity doesn't wane,
that's
then as a CEO, like I think it's great all day long.
That's the key piece. I think, especially when you look at kind of what's happening in the economy, and I've talked to a whole bunch of sales leaders at Dreamforce last week, and they're all seeing the same thing. Where hey, those deals that maybe took 4 or 5 calls, and I know there was a question from somebody in the chat about a no show. How do you get somebody to engage? Deals are taking longer to close. And as a leader, you have to make sure your reps don't get into the weeds of the frustration of sales and you lift them up. And so being one of the things that, coming into this work-life balance, the culture, how do you build people up in that piece? And we're being in the office, you hear we have a bell anytime, somebody closes a deal, they ring the bell. That makes every other rep that's in that office that hears that bell want to go find a deal. It taps into the competitive spirit of things. And it actually, it's, not to quote, it's a wonderful life, but it's almost like an angel gets its wings every time that bell rings because we got a deal in, and it's a good thing.
It is. In fact, this morning they were ringing the bell, and they had a live, Zoom on someone's phone, and they were simulcasting it to other offices. So it is important. I think those kind of things are still, even if we're remote, those kind of things are still pretty important.
Now so we've talked about the kind of the first line managers. This is probably closer to me. It's called the when the sales VPs and the great exploration that Harvard Business Study put out. What are your thoughts on, during an unstable time, unstable economy, everything that's happening in the country and in the world, really? How does a VP, how do you make sure that they're engaged, that they're not going and exploring other options, right? Because what we said, if they're in it for the long-term money, sometimes based on the economy, things can be longer. Deals are harder to close. They have the bigger number and things
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah, so that's another cute catchphrase flag there. Now it's called the Great Exploration. I don't know if people get paid to come up with these.
I'm just waiting where they call it like the great like signature, and you can just send
The
order
great
forms
signing,
out.
yeah, it's like,
You just get order forms signed all the time. Like, can we get to that area of
yeah. When
things?
do we get that to happen? But anyway, your point's well taken, and I think it completely is backed up by the data in our survey, right? Which is, if you're not paying attention to what your head of sales cares about, then you are going to be at risk. And I think the things that they care about is not just how much they're making. Clearly, the data shows that. That's fifth on the list of 9 reasons that they would stay. The reasons at the top of the list are about the management team and the culture, about feeling connected, about feeling like you're doing good. Those are a whole different kettle of fish, really, as far as motivating and keeping your head of sales engaged. And so I would just encourage anybody who has senior level salespeople reporting to them, encourage them to read the report. It's a good starting point to start the conversation, at least with your head of sales, and figure out what makes them tick.
Well, and I think too, it's also what we're doing. What we did this yesterday with a company, getting them more enabled, right? How do we invest in them to grow their careers, put the pieces in place? Because there's things that, yeah, money is always great. Like, no one's ever going to turn down more money, but it's how do you invest in someone from a long-term perspective? And that's where I think, this, that sales leader sometimes can take to a negative
Yeah.
instead of a positive.
I think that's true. And I think also, I talked to a lot of CEOs, and I think CROs, I think that's a very tough job. I think you have a tough job.
Really?
I do. I think it's a tough job. Not only do you have to make numbers, but there's so many apps that companies are using, right? And you talk to and it's like they got an app for everything. And I think if you're being honest and you're talking to these CROs, in a quiet moment, they're frustrated by it because they don't know what half of these apps do. Half of them don't talk to the other half, and it just feels like a lot of energy being put into force feed a bunch of app du jours on these people. And I think my sense is that CROs would love it if they could net it down to a few core pieces that help them drive the business, and sort of get rid of a lot of the other noise level stuff, because it's just too much. It's too much. And imagine how the reps feel.
Well, I mean, yeah, it's funny because we drink our own champagne here. We use our commissions tool, we use our forecasting tool, and I don't know if you've heard, but our CTO will come to me and say, "Hey, our AI is saying you're doing this," and I go, "I know what the AI is saying. Thank
I've
you."
heard that. Yeah.
But it's funny because you're seeing it because we sell the product and we're in that space. It's a different level of inspection versus if you were selling, a document routing tool or whatever that may be, workflows, AI, whatever. Everyone always wants to go in and say, "Hey, sales should do X, Y, Z. Sales should do this." And as to your point, as a sales leader, it's like, well, I can't sit there and say, "Hey, product, can you get this done in a day?" Because it's just I just look at it on my
Yeah.
screen.
Yeah.
And so it's a different motion. I think that, as sales leaders evolve and, as you see the next generation come up, they're a lot more technical than, previous generations. They understand they're getting in front of coding more. They're doing all these
They're
things.
much more adopting of using the technology.
Correct.
And my point is that I think they want to streamline those technologies. There's just too many out there. And so getting these point apps that don't talk to others, I think is a big mistake. But you're absolutely right. Like, in the old days when I was coming up and I was a head of sales, there was a little bit of like pride of, oh, I know I have this dark science, black art of being able to call the ball.
Right.
Right. And here's my forecast to the CEO. And I don't know why we got that way, but that's just the way it was. When you talk to, if you're talking to a younger, newer, next generation CRO, they're like, yeah, I'm going to call the ball, but if I could get some data that's using AI to tell me what it's going to be, hallelujah. Like it's just another component to add to my repertoire to help me zero in on what the right
We're,
number is. Why would somebody not want to do that in this day and age?
totally agree.
And why would you not be doing that in this day and
We're
age?
not, it's not a Will Smith movie where it's man versus machine and AI. And
Right.
you got to go.
It's not the enemy. It's there to help
not,
you. You can turn it off.
there's this whole piece of, we were talking about this the other day of, once again, looking 12, 16, 18 months into the future, where's the economy sit, and getting ahead of it and looking at, it's not so much the forecasting of what are you going to call, it's where's my risk? How do I go in and I look at what's in the pipeline? What are my reps doing? Because it's not so much of, hey, you're not making enough phone calls today, so you need to go make phone calls. It's, hey, you're not making enough phone calls. What we've seen based on the data and the AI, this has a lag. This is a lagging indicator, because in 6 months, when you come to me and you say, "Hey, I don't have enough pipeline," it's because you didn't put the work in now, or it's this deal's at risk because we're not engaged at the right level. We're not asking the right questions.
Yeah.
And so it definitely is a shift in mindset.
It is, and I think it's important too. I mean, the new tools that are, I'm not trying to pitch our forecasting piece per se,
No, but go ahead.
but yeah, why not? But the point is, like, it shouldn't just be a siloed app. If it's not connected to your comp, if it isn't able to tell you exactly which deals are going to close according to the pattern recognition by the machines, but then also which reps have those deals and where they are in their year. Some have made clubs. Some could be at 20% money. Some could be at 5% money. For the CFO to just be able to know exactly what the forecast number is based on the machine learning and AI, and know to a penny what the commission expense is going to be, that's a whole new world. And what we're seeing is CROs and CFOs kind of like much more coupled at the hip, whereas before is a lot of like, well, you told me it was this and that, and and CFOs are calling the ball on a much different commission number and either missing it by a mile, or they're over committing dollars to commissions,
Well,
and
I
missing
think
it by under missing it.
that's what goes back into kind of what we do, and what the things I try to teach or enable my managers to think about is, we're selling something that actually impacts them. And I think when you talk about kind of the sales leadership, potential great attrition or great quiet quitting, whatever that may be, they want to go and they want to do something that's meaningful to them, right? It's longer the days where you just go work for a company because, hey, I can make the most money here. They want to be, it has to be impactful to them. They have to care about what they're selling, because either it does something for the greater good, they really like the technology, they believe in the leadership and the company and the vision.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think that came out in the survey quite a bit, where the respondents were saying one of the above comp, one of the things that causes me to either leave or stay is whether I feel like my company is doing good. And I don't. My sense of it is it's not just am I in an industry that's doing good, right? Because who knows what industries are necessarily doing well. I think how I read it was more, is my company doing good? Do I go home at night feeling like I'm doing good? And I think that's an area where just tout our horn a little bit here. I think as early on, Mark Benioff had that 1% pledge, and we were one of the early companies to jump on board that, and we put 1% of our founding shares into what became our 501c3 foundation, which we call Xactly One. And I think I think that's an example where we really rally around that as a company. We're constantly doing stuff. In fact, we have pretty close to 70% of our employees worldwide that are giving money every paycheck into our foundation so that we can then do good and give back to the local communities. And one example yesterday, we gave money to a foundation, a 501c3 that's helping hurricane victims, not this current hurricane, but the one that was 2 weeks ago or a week and a half ago in Puerto Rico.
Yep.
And we have employees whose family members have been without power for like a week, and so that kind of stuff. And I think when leaders and individuals see that their company's doing that kind of stuff, that's the feel good stuff I'm talking about. It if it's just a job and I'm showing up and nobody cares about doing anything good for anybody, what's the point? The cost of changing jobs today in this new world is literally change your email.
Right.
I mean, you don't have to even clean your office out anymore.
Well, and I think too, I mean, it's one of those things where as people go and they leave, I mean, as someone who's boomerang, but I've been here for 14 years. I mean, that's something to your credit you've always done is giving back to the community. I mean, we just moved to the Los Gatos area, but we were in San Jose for a long time, and we would do things, with Habitat for Humanities. Um, uh, we painted that mural at that school. We sponsored the schools, like to have people come in to give from an underprivileged area, bring them in, teach them different areas, whether it's in the front desk, it's in support, it's in sales, whatever that may be. And those are the pieces that you just can't start a company. Our company can't just change that. It has to be embedded in their core. And we have our Care Week coming up in the first week of November, where it's a company-wide, worldwide effort where you give back, you do good, you be better. It's really embracing that into your core.
Yeah, I agree. The only thing I would maybe take exception is companies can change that, right? I mean, I agree it has to be embedded into the core. It has to be at the highest level of the company is something that's really important. But they can add that and change that and begin to. It just takes time for it to be ingrained in the culture. And
But if you're turning people over,
well, it makes it harder. But it's kind of a chicken and the egg, right? You're turning people over because you don't have that kind of a culture, and that's a big problem. It has to be legit. It has to be real. It can't just be, you know. I know some companies that like they throw money at those kind of things so they can check off boxes, but they don't really believe it. They're not out there. The CEO's not attending these events. They're not. He or she's not really out helping. And so, I think it starts at the top and that's what sets the tone. And
yep.
people see, hey, yeah, this company really is taking that seriously, or oh, this is just bullshit. They're just throwing money at it so that they can claim it. It's a very different cultural.
So I think we have a few minutes left. Last question. So we've talked about a lot of different things, but when it comes down to it, how can companies proactively combat this sales talent crisis and its effects?
Well, I think it's a lot of the things that we've touched on today. I mean, there's certainly some cultural things. There's certainly this do good thing that they should be touching on. There's certainly this idea of, uh, you know, find out what makes your leaders tick, find out what makes your leaf level employees tick, and try to design things that's more tailored and customized. This We're not in a one to many world anymore. We're in a one to one world, and the systems that are available today can allow you to do one to one customized sorts of things that people couldn't do back in the Excel spreadsheets days. And I say back in those days, even though 70% of the world companies today still use spreadsheets for all
Which
these
is
things.
crazy.
It's insane, and it's criminal if you ask me. I mean, those CEOs should be shot because they're hurting the value of their companies by doing that. It's just a no brainer. So those are the things that I think. I think that you don't need to reinvent the wheel. You don't need to kind of sit there in a room all alone with a flashlight and try to find your way to how to motivate people and how to drive better performance. It's out. I mean, the data is there.
Right.
There's empirical data out there available to show you the way
You just
and
have to be
shine
you
a
have to be
big
open.
mega light. You have to be open to it.
You
And
have to be
want
open
do
to it.
Yeah.
Um, I think though that's our time. I'm going to check the chat, see if there's any questions. If I'll give it a second or two here. But really want to thank you for. I know you're a busy guy and you've been traveling all over the world, literally. And so one of the things that we're going to be doing is within our social page, we're going to be putting out some reports with that. Um, and go check those out. Go see what you can be doing. If you're a sales leader, reach out to us. Let's have a conversation, because this isn't something where it's necessarily, hey, I want to sell you software. It's a networking thing. What's actually happening in the industry? How do you get ahead of it? Because once it starts with the leaders, it can go down to the reps, and we can get into this whole conversation all over again. So with that, and then not next month, in November, early November, we're going to be doing exactly forecasting and continuous sales planning, talking about how companies need to be looking at that as they go into the next fiscal year and are approaching that. What should you be thinking about? How should you go about planning? And then how do you actually execute on that plan? So with that, thank you everyone for attending, and
Cool. Thanks for having me. I
till
appreciate it.
next
Thanks for
time.
attending. And if we didn't get to your question, just we're easy to find on LinkedIn. Just send us a request, and we'll make sure we answer it. Whatever you had. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.